when it comes to tech in general practice, the various different things that you kind of have to know about from the techie side. So these are your digital certificates. These are things like, your DPIAs, your DCB certificates, and various other things. And let's be honest, it's a little bit confusing at times. On this episode, I'm joined by, from my perspective, an expert on this because he's gone through filling in all these things so many times that he's going to helpfully explain all this to us in a way that we can all understand and make life so much easier when it comes to the digital certificates in primary care. I'm talking about Dr. Dustyn State from Primary Care IT. I'm Dr. Gandalf. Make sure you join us as we tech enhance your primary care and learning. Hello, GP learners, and welcome to this episode. So we've got a rather interesting episode for you because this is going to be probably a little bit, oh gosh, it's about tech and weird stuff and all that kind of stuff. But actually, this stuff is really important, particularly if you're a partner or if you're a digital transformation lead in particular. I'm going to say this is going to be an education you are sorely in need of, because actually this is stuff that you kind of need to know, but probably think you don't want to know about and stuff. But you need to know it. And to help us explain things like digital certificates, I'm really happy to be joined by a good colleague of mine, Dr. Dustyn State from Primary Care IT. How are you doing there, Dustyn?
Hey, Gandhi, I'm good, thanks. You?
Yeah, ticking on as ever. Lovely day in general practice as it can be and stuff. Now, I know you've been doing some amazing things over the past few years with tech and digital side of things, with primary care and things. Can you just give us a bit of a fill in terms of what's been going on from your perspective and kind of how you've gone on this journey of, understanding all the IT stuff in tech?
Yeah, so primary care IT is kind of my baby, born out of stuff that we've done in our own practice to try and make lives easier for ourselves, just by initially just optimizing our own clinical systems to make them as simple as we possibly could. And we started sharing that with other surgeries, and then we realized that if you do that, you need appropriate support and also appropriate certification. So one of our early journeys was we did a hypertension project and got patients to self-monitor their blood pressure. This is about 5-6 years ago, so way pre-COVID, but kind of actually really engage patients in monitoring their own blood pressure and then feeding it back into the practice. And we have protocols that then assess that blood pressure and then gave clinicians feedback on it. And one of the first things when we presented that at a national conference was that NHS Digital came and saw me and said, "Oh, do you know that looks a bit like a medical device? And do you know you need regulatory certificates if you're doing that kind of thing? And what about MHRA regulation? And what about your clinical safety cases and all these kind of things?" And at that stage, I was just a jobbing GP, full-time partner, trainer, involved in commissioning. And I kind of went, I don't know anything about that kind of stuff. So spoke to quite a few learned colleagues who know a lot about things in that space. And there is a real community of people who are really generous with their time and happy to share information about that kind of stuff. And kind of went on that journey. So we've kind of grown from being kind of a small number of surgeries who we shared stuff with on a voluntary basis to now having around about 1,000 surgeries that we look after up and down the UK from a kind of basically anything you need to optimize your clinical system. So we've got an online video consultation product in collaboration with IATRO. We also have a data analytics platform called One Analytics, and then we also have embedded systems within both System One and EMIS Web as well. So we've kind of, with those products, we've been on that journey and had to get those kind of certifications and have our business processes assessed by people like NHS Digital for some of the frameworks that we've entered our products onto. So we've done the hard learning.
Sounds like it. And I guess with that, like we kind of started when I mentioned at the start, that there are so many different terms and stuff that comes around when we talk about tech. That I can guarantee that there's loads of clinicians out there that are just like, yeah, that sounds like gobbledygook, and probably hope that somebody else sorts it all out for them. I'm going to admit I've been one of those at times as well, because they even confuse me, let's be honest. So I guess it probably would be useful trying to go through them. Now, we've kind of aptly called them the D terms because they all happen to pretty much start with the D, although there's some interesting ones in addition to that. How would you go about starting to explain this to a novice?
So I guess when you're looking at a new bit of software or a new bit of kit, you've got to think, how is this coming to me and how's it been assessed already? because if it's been assessed on one of the national frameworks, so if you've got a tool that is, say, on GPIT Futures, or it's on the DFO CVC framework, so Digital First Online Consultation Video Consultation Framework, so that's like your Accurex, your MJOG, your iPlato, your OneContact if you're looking at our platform, then those products have been through a degree of scrutiny before they've got to you. So they've been looked at by NHS, what was D and now is E, and they've been through a framework application process that has looked at them in a lot of detail and that has assessed various different things. And by and large, things tend to fall into either data or into clinical safety. And those are the two kind of areas that you need to be aware of, because data, you need to know that whoever's touching any of your data, as you're the data controller as a practice, that they're doing the right thing with it, storing it in the right places, they're only processing it in the way that you're happy with, and that they're destroying it and they're kind of like dealing with it in a responsible way and you can trust them. And then clinical safety, you need to make sure that whatever they've developed has been through a clinical safety process and has had all the risks assessed and has made sure that it's kind of, it does what it's supposed to do, and that there aren't any undue clinical risks occurring as a result of use of the platform. And so the frameworks do a lot of that heavy lifting for you. So like DFO CVC, they had huge numbers of spreadsheets that they would send through to suppliers with what were called traceability matrices that would ask you all sorts of different questions, and you had to fill them all out and supply your evidence. And then lots of backwards and forwards and kind of conversations with NHSD about exactly how your stuff did what you said it did, and made sure that they were kind of following it all through. So if stuff comes to you on an approved framework, then to some extent you can be a little bit more relaxed about it, because actually a lot of those assurance processes have already been looked at and taken care of on your behalf. If you haven't got it on an approved framework, so it's a separate bit of software that's come to you in a different way, then you need to assess, okay, so what other kind of certification have they got, or how else has this software been looked at, and who is the organization behind this, and what do I need to know about how they're managing data and clinical safety.
Okay. And is that where things like, I guess, the DPIAs, the DCBs, or all those kind of things come into play?
Kind of, yeah. So to unpick some of those terms, so DPIA is a data protection impact assessment, and that's something that you as a practice need to do. The provider should help you with it, so should give you some information about it, about their product, and what their product is doing with the patient data that you're assessing. But essentially, and you should involve your DPO in this, right? So every practice will have a DPO, and if you're taking on a new product, then you should be saying to the supplier, can you give me a model DPIA for your product that I can look at and kind of to help to fill in my own DPIA? And you probably need to be getting your DPO to then look at that and then ask questions of the supplier, and sort of say, okay, so what data is being pulled out and for what purpose, and where's it being stored, and what's the security around where it's being stored, and how long is it retained for, and kind of all of these kind of questions, which they're fairly standard in a DPIA. And I think probably most practice managers have usually got a reasonable handle on that kind of side of things, because that then feeds into your privacy notice, which you need to make sure that any new piece of tech is included within your privacy notice, so that you're telling your patients, we use this bit of software, it manages data for this specific purpose, we transfer some data to this organization, but they deal with it in this particular way, and we're assured that that's a safe way for them to manage that data.
Cool. And I guess just to clarify, so the DPO is the data protection officer. Everyone in practice ideally should know who that is, because it should be part of the IG training and protocols that you have. So if you're not sure, probably a good tip at the end of this session is to just go check so that you know who that is in your organization. It tends to be similar people in similar places, doesn't it? Because there's not that many of them, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, usually tends to be, and usually tends to be a kind of regional thing. And actually, a lot of the time, you'd usually expect most organisations will have dealt with your DPO for another organisation before they often come to you. So it's not that unusual for your DPO to say, "Oh, I know about these guys because we've assessed them as part of another process." But it's important to note that they're only assessing them for data. So it's literally data processing element of what they're doing. So it gives you some assurances that they're dealing with data correctly, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all of their information governance stuff is covered off, and it doesn't necessarily mean that their clinical safety stuff is covered off either. So it's literally just kind of assuring yourself that you're doing what is required for GDPR in terms of assessing how they process your data.
Okay. And I guess one of the other terms I often hear are the DCBs, for lack of better terms. So can you explain what they are to us and when they become relevant and stuff?
Yeah, so that's clinical safety. So that's the other side of it. And there's two DCBs. So there's an 0129 and an 0160. So the 0129 is something that the clinical or the supplier should be utilising within their organisation. And then the 0160 is something that an organisation assessing the supplier should be undertaking to assess that the supplier is doing the right things in terms of clinical safety. So that's the kind of the broad strokes of what you're doing. So 0129 for supplier, 0160 for whoever's purchasing the product. So if you're a practice or a PCN and you're purchasing something on your own and it's not on framework, really you want to be making sure that you're looking at what the clinical safety side of things is looking like, and the kind of documentation you really want to ask for from the supplier is that you want to see there should be a clinical safety case, and the clinical safety case should be written by an external clinical safety or chief clinical safety information officer. So a bit like you have your DPO for who's external, who's your data protection person. A lot of suppliers will have an external person who they employ as a clinical safety officer, and they perform a similar kind of role. So they will look at the organisation. So ours looks at primary care IT and says, "Tell me about your products and services, and then tell me about the risks that you've identified with them." And safety officers usually are practicing doctors, so they will be somebody who has a clinical background, and they'll have been trained by NHS Digital, so they've been through that kind of assurance process in terms of understanding what they want to do, and you basically come up with what's called a hazard log. So for each area that you identify a risk, you'll look at that risk and then you'll track how likely it is to happen and what the impact of it would be if it were to happen, and then you'll apply a treatment process to that. So you'll say either I can accept it, or I might need to modify it, or I might need to decide that actually my product can't function in this particular way, or it may be that actually, do you know what, the current processes that practices are doing are actually more risky than even the worst case scenario of using the technology. So actually that's okay, you can still proceed with using the technology, but you need to describe all of that. So you should have a kind of a clinical safety case that kind of explains all of that stuff.
Okay. So we covered that the DCB 0129 is from the supplier's perspective, and the DCB 0160 is from the user's perspective, and that's probably the ones that many of the practices need to be looking at, I would imagine then. Yeah.
So if you're purchasing some tech and it hasn't been assessed by anybody else in your region, then you probably ought to be undertaking an 0160 or asking a commissioner who's purchasing the tools on your behalf to undertake an 0160. And that basically tests that the 0129 has been done properly. Okay. So it will unpick kind of some of the questions in the 0129 and sort of say, "Oh, tell me about this," or "Tell me about that," or like, "What about this and what about that?" So again, some regions have actually undertaken their own framework. So if you're in Birmingham and Solihull, for example, they've got a really good commissioning framework that they've worked through with suppliers, and they've been through all of these kind of assurance processes for any suppliers that are wanting to work within their region. So that means like they've done a really thorough 0160 on any of the tools that are on that platform. So you just need to know whether that has happened in your region or not. And if it hasn't, then just be thinking, do we need to be doing that? It's probably out of the skill range of most people, I would imagine. So it'd probably be something you'd be wanting to look for support from commissioners, or look from support from your digital team leads within your ICB region. They'll be used to doing this kind of thing.
So I guess if we're looking at a use case, so there's a practice out there, they want to look at using a new product that's, like you said, not on any of those frameworks, and not already got that kind of pre-approval rubber stamp of you should be okay kind of thing. And they're wanting to look at using that within their practice. They should be going through the DCB 160 process, and they probably need to contact their local IT leads to give them a hand with it, by the sounds of it, unless they're super techie.
Yeah, I'd suggest so, unless that, I mean, it's a big job to undertake it, and if you've not had any experience of doing it before, I'd suggest you get some help with it to try and do it. There is something new to the NHS, which is another D called DTAC, which is digital technology assessment criteria, and that does cover a lot of these kind of areas as well. So it kind of covers information and governance and what you're doing with all those kind of things, but it also covers clinical safety and a lot of those other areas as well. So it's got 5 areas from memory, which I'm just refreshing my memory about. So clinical safety is one area, data protection is another, technical assurance is another, interoperability is another, and then usability and accessibility is another as well. So it assesses, or it's broadly at the moment a self-assessment process. So you do need to be mindful of that a supplier can just say, yeah, we do those things. And actually at the moment, are they externally validated and tested? No, they're not. Will they be in the future? Yes, I suspect they will be. But again, a supplier who kind of understands DTAC will say, yes, we've been through DTAC, and here's my bundle of evidence, and here's my information, and you can look at that and kind of assess your risk.
Okay, cool. So I guess we've talked about the DCBs, we've talked about the DPIAs, we've talked about the DTACs. I guess, is there any other kind of compliance stuff that people need to be aware of when we're talking about all the various different certificates and that kind of stuff in primary care?
Yeah, there's quite a few others. So and kind of ranging from, so you want to make sure that any organisation you're working with has definitely got ICO registration. So registration with the Information Commissioner's Office, like that's a given. So they should be able to supply you with their registration number, and you should be able to check on the ICO registration page whether there are any outstanding issues with the ICO. You've got the Data Protection and Security Toolkit. So practices will be really aware of that, because they have to fill that in every year, and kind of fill in how they're complying with that. So again, suppliers have to do the same, and so a good supplier you will find will have a published like DPIA, Data Protection and Security called it, DPST. So that's another thing that you might want to look at. Some suppliers will have Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus, which are both external certifications that can be kind of used to assess kind of risk of data breaches and risk of kind of penetrations of any of their platforms by organizations that shouldn't be accessing those platforms. So those are both kind of worth being aware of. And then you've also got, at the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got external validation like ISO 27001. So that's a internationally recognized standard in information security, and it's externally audited. So we've been through that process and have ISO 27001 certification. That means we have an entire information security management system, and it's externally audited to make sure that it's doing exactly what it needs to do. So it's a bit like CQC for practices, but kind of CQC on steroids, like really kind of detailed kind of information securities procedures and processes, right down to kind of looking at your physical security. So yeah, how easy is it to access your office? Like wandering around your office when the external auditor comes and says, well, what's this bit of information lying around here? Like, has that been like, what classification has that data got? What are all your access levels for all the different platforms that you use? How often do you regularly review those? Like a lot of the stuff, actually, you think still as a practicing GP partner, I think actually there's quite a lot of that stuff that I don't think we always do that well in general practice. And potentially should learn some of those things from some of these kind of fairly standard industry ways of kind of managing some of these information security issues. So like our last audit, they were like, "Oh, show me last 5 joiners, show me last 5 levers. Like, where's your audit trail of when you added them to your system and what permissions you gave them and to which applications you gave them permissions? And then where's your audit trail of when they left, when you removed those permissions, and how can we see that was done on what date?" And basically asking you for audit trails of all of that kind of stuff. And then you do internal audits and check that all of this stuff is working and that all of the procedures and processes that you've written and say that you're doing, you are doing. And then they externally audit it on a 12-monthly basis as well, so that you know that there's some real kind of validation that what you're doing is right.
Cool. So I guess we've talked about all the different certificates and stuff. We talked about the compliance things that come through as well. I guess if you had, say, for example, you're a partner in a reasonable sized practice and a company comes to you and says, we've got this new piece of kit. Let's say, because it's topical, it includes some element of AI. Okay. And this is going to make your life so much easier. It's going to help you in practice. It's going to mean that, you can go home quicker and all that kind of stuff and things. As that practice individual, what do they need to look at to make sure that they are safe, both from a data perspective and from a clinical perspective? What process do you think they should be going through to make sure that they are not only compliant, but I guess doing it in a way that means that it's sensible and manageable and that kind of thing?
So anybody who says to you that they're using AI for anything clinical at the moment, I would be highly worried about in a general practice setting.
Okay.
A lot of AI, in quotes, is kind of snake oil and actually just branch decision logic, and actually that's fine. Like, branch logic is perfectly good and very safe and very usable in most instances, but anybody who's saying that it's AI, it's not. So is it AI is the first question, and then what's it being used for within your practice? Because arguably, I think there's a really big role for using things like ChatGPT and improving practice external communications. Like actually, you can create a lot of really good content and really good information for your patients by using AI to generate. Yes, you need to double check it, but actually it can save a lot of time. There's a lot of validity in using it for creating some of your practice policies as well, because it saves you having to do all of it from scratch, and actually that can be really useful, but you need to double check it yourself. If it's for clinical management, wow, I'd be nervous of it immediately at the moment, because actually, are there any frameworks for assessing artificial intelligence and for assessing its safety in clinical use cases at the moment? No. Have we got to learn? Have we got to learn how to do that? Yes. Like, how do you audit trail artificial intelligence currently and track back and look at clinical safety events that occur off the back of that? At the moment, it's very hard to do that. Very, very hard to do that. There are some forerunners out there who are doing really innovative and interesting and fun stuff, but it's usually as part of evaluation projects or kind of early pilot studies that are looking at, and anything like that. I would really, really want somebody who knew everything about clinical safety to be pouring all over it, and really giving me a lot of, because if I go back 6 years where I knew nothing about any of this stuff, like my knowledge gaps were massive. And I whilst I would have thought of myself as a fairly tech savvy GP, I did did not have a clue what I was on about at all when it came to all of this stuff. And you really need somebody who does understand all of that stuff. So I would be wanting to get somebody from my a digital lead from my ICB or somebody like that to look at it, assess it, and then give me some assurances that I don't need to worry about any of that stuff.
Okay. So if I can pick up what you were saying there, so what I would understand is if you were looking at some sort of newfangled tech that promises to do amazing stuff and things, so you probably want to look at some of their assurances in terms of the compliance, like you said. So there's the ISO, and I've already forgotten the number you said.
7001.
That's the one. I guess obviously making sure they're on the ICO website as well in terms of having the information commissioner stuff. That's stuff they should have done. It sounds like there's an element of looking at things like the DPIA, so the impact assessment, as well as the DCB 0160, which is the clinical side of it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I guess in there, I mean, are there any pitfalls that you can see, particularly when it comes to general practice kind of data or clinical safety? I guess, things that sometimes I know that have caught people out is where the data is stored, for example. Those kind of, are there anything that you should be, saying to them, these are the things you might just want to focus on when you're looking at these kind of documents and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, all of that kind of stuff. You need to make sure that you are storing the data in the UK, and that it's not being kind of filtered off elsewhere. Just beware of products that use kind of other suppliers for managing kind of form submissions and stuff. So like Jotform or Google Forms, great platforms for collecting information, but data is immediately leaves the UK shores and heads over to the US, which immediately means you're breaking several rules under GDPR. So beware of kind of, I guess, like well-meaning and well thought through kind of ideas, but poorly executed in terms of kind of data governance and information security and clinical safety kind of approaches. And I mean, anybody who's kind of wanting to get into that space and wants to know anything about those kind of things, then like drop people like me or others in the space a line and sort of say, look, trying to do this, like, how can we do that in a way that's safe and compliant? Because there is a kind of like a real collection of kind of people around who know a reasonable amount of stuff about this and are quite happy to try and help folk who want to do similar stuff that helps general practice and healthcare in general.
Cool. Okay. So I guess if people did want to find out more about particularly the products you've been looking at, you mentioned obviously the one contact and the one data sets and stuff and things, which potentially, I think could be really time saving for practices as well. Where would you recommend they have a look at in terms of finding out?
Just have a look on our website at primarycareIT.co.uk, and you can see loads of information about all the stuff that we do on there. Or if you drop an email to the team at primarycareIT.co.uk, or me at Dustyn at primarycareIT.co.uk, and we can pick things up.
If people do want to check that out, I'll put those links down below. Alternately, if you do want to check out more about AI in general practice, and particularly ChatGPT, the miracle thing that's going on and stuff, you may want to check out this episode that's coming up right here, which is myself and talking with Dr. Keith Grimes, talking about how AI can potentially be used in general practice. It's an interesting episode and covers some of the stuff that Dustyn mentioned already. So, it's still moving on and working that way. And as always, if you want to find out more information, let us know, because we're here to help tech enhance your primary care and learning. And we'll catch you in the next episode. See you later.